So I'd like to welcome you all to meeting number 1 of the Life class, which has been really many decades in its making, and I will tell you why, because so many people and their research and their love, we've sort of braided together the cords of wisdom and understanding and love and all of our collective suffering together into the curriculum that we'll be offering you. And as I said, even the initials of the Life class stand for truth, love, and care. Things that we treasure in this earthly life that we have. And the thing is, more often than not, we didn't receive them when we needed them. And we have a hard time giving them to ourselves. And as Clay said in a sermon this morning, talking about the world and the recent changes, whether it's the sports world with NIL regulations, whether it's power and greed at the top, whether it's us just coming to our own dissatisfactions that, wow, I've got all this stuff and I've got all this money, but I feel restless, irritable, discontent in my life, or I always want more and I'm never satisfied, whether it's sort of a position of spiritual bankruptcy or I'm just irritated all the time, whatever it might be. We all kind of come to a place that has its own definition like that, in which we really, really wonder, what is the meaning of my life? What is the significance of my life? Where am I going to put my energy into things that really do last? Maybe some of you have heard people talk about legacies, but they're not things that are tangible. So if you're here, or if you're listening in, you not only have courage, you've taken the first step of courage.
Can you speak up a little, please?
Sure. Oh, thank you so much, Julie, for telling me. Yeah, this is our constant adversary. Yeah. So if you're here, you're listening, you not only have courage, you have a hunger to find freedom, but you also deeply desire a richer, fuller, and more joyful life. And you may be at a total stalemate with it. You may be wondering, just how do I begin? With whom do I begin? One thing that I'm always very conscious of is that people that I interact with may be from many faiths or may be from none at all. Now, I personally come from a background of deep spiritual abuse and from a background where I never wanted to darken a church again at many times. And many of the people that we work with in this room, Vicki, I hope you don't mind me pointing you out, Vicki's Grace King, but we do provide services in this room every Wednesday night for hundreds of people that come out of calamitous divorces and abuse and that sort of thing. And there are many people who maybe were raised in a church, but they have a hard time even coming through the door because of their memories. But pretty quickly we let them know, hey, this is not a requirement. We are not here with any intention of converting you or anything like that. We also have Grief Share that meets to help people to recover. So there are many, many things that we do on this campus where faith is not a condition. We just know that there's got to be something greater than us, and we're not it, and maybe our way's not working, okay? And we can all agree on that. We may look out at our remaining years or look out at the opportunity we have for a legacy, and that may just be, what did I teach the people around me? How will they remember me when I'm gone? As a parent, as a grandparent, as an aunt, as an uncle, special friend, mentor. How do I do this? How do I do this well? You may have become sickened or confused by all that psychobabble out in the news, out in social media. For example, narcissistic this and narcissistic that and on and on. I don't need to pick on that N word so much. There's a lot of them. But you just want an unbiased and clean definition of some of these things. You wish to educate yourself on these terms, what they really mean and how they might or not apply to your life situation and the people around you. And best of all, if you're willing to hang in here with me, we can identify our own maladaptive behaviors and our own thought distortions. Believe it or not, the stuff that our brain tells us in here is not the truth, is often not the reality. And we can learn how and with what to replace those things with. It is absolutely amazing. I will give someone just a sheet of ways in which our minds distort reality, 4 or 5 things, and it's just as though it's the biggest eye-opener in the world, because we are trained to think, believe our thoughts in this culture. So one of the things that draws us to a class like this is, again, a desire to make sense out of our sufferings in life. At this point, just where is all this life going? We may have regrets. We may have things we're trying to come to terms with. We may, in our 60s, think, where am I going with these years? How do I make these next years effective and important? So this room here, known affectionately as the Bay Room, does a lot of stuff. This church has been here a long time. I've only been here 14 years. I was teaching at other churches through a strange series of circumstances. I did the one thing I said I would never do, as many of you know, which was get married again. There was a really healthy person out there. In fact, this entire campus pervades my life story. So just to give you a little tiny background, I can go back in my memory to age 22, and I was sitting in South Hall, which is a tiny white building at the other end over here, and I had just gotten through with an intervention on 2 of my close family members. We did a double intervention at once and gotten both of them through treatment. And I'm in Al-Anon and they're in AA. And I have my first Al-Anon meeting over there. And then fast forward to age 42, and I'm the last one, I think, that's going to come down with an ism. And I come back from 9 weeks of impaired professionals treatment for awful post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I've gone straight down the tubes into alcoholism in about 18 months. And I'm going through the most horrible divorce after a 29-year relationship. And I'm back over there. Don't you think that on some level I'm thinking, where in the hell is my life going, and God, am I not mad at you? I tried to do everything right. Everything right. And still, nothing worked for these people. Nothing worked for me. And if anything, not only did I not get ahead, I have backtracked myself into a deeper hole than I ever thought possible. Okay. I had to relearn everything. I had to rewire my nervous system. So that was when I finally stopped listening to the stuff I was programmed to learn, what I had gathered as a young adult, what the world told me, and I started on this, which was studying the best of what science told us, real stuff, like Bessel van der Kolk, who you probably know now as the author of The Body Keeps the Score. Our issues are in our tissues. Right away, I started learning from some of the best people who had trained right with him, and I started really beginning to get out there and know this stuff practically. Started doing body work, started following teachers and trainers, body, mind, and spirit. And then more recently, in the last 10 years, Dr. Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No. And then, to speed up to the last 5 years, following the work of Dr. Tim Fletcher, who has put together this incredible program that we're going to bring to you all. It's just in such a structured form. And he had the same path that I did with these other two researchers. So there's nothing more validating than going through great pain, confusion, and suffering and feeling like you're the only one in the world, only to find that you have like-minded community and that there's medical evidence for what you've been suffering for the whole time. When you've been told, get a grip, it must be your imagination, there's no cure for this, things like that. It must be like when the Israelites wandered through the desert for 40 years and all of a sudden there's the promised land. So you can imagine how I might feel this morning, just for example, just using my life, it's the only one I know the best, describing how I felt, good as dead, no use to anybody, completely shattered. What in the world had my life come to, and how absolutely mad I was at God back over here. And then 15 years later, I get a marriage proposal from the senior pastor's father here at Woodmont Christian Church. I'm sober all this time. I don't even resemble the person that I was because I've had so much wonderful help with all this stuff. And I marry into the Stauffer family. And they're saying, okay, we have a new change of regime here. And what do you think that we might want to do? What do I think? Well, let's see. I've been doing divorce care as a leader for, 15 years. Yeah, I've survived that. Yeah, I've taught other people to do it. Well, we might do this. Well, yeah, that's happened to me. Yeah, that's happened to me. Yeah, that's happened to me. You mean really it happened to you? Yeah, that happened to me. That happened to me. That happened to me. So gradually I began to make meaning out of suffering. But the meaning comes when we do it with and for other people, when we give it away. Clay just delivered a wonderful sermon this morning in which he talked about that possessions and riches in themselves really lead to an empty life, and how we eventually get to a point to where we truly discover that, and we get to that empty place within ourselves. It's been defined a lot of different ways, but sort of a God-shaped vacuum, or a withered soul, or empty soul, in which a lot of people have lost their creativity perhaps along the way, and connecting back up with their passion or their creativity, or maybe there's anger they need to express. Often it's learning about resentment and the nature of that, and just working through a program on how to really let go of that, and quit listening to all these church people who say, oh, just give it to Jesus. That's not true, by the way. If you've ever been told that, it's a whole lot more complicated. That one gets us in trouble. There's a lot of untwistings of things like that we will talk about in this class. We'll talk about the things that people did not want to talk about back then, when you really did need to talk about it. There's a lot of those things. So we basically have gotten out of touch with our little authentic, curious, lovely, innocent little selves. Now, I don't know about you all, but I was raised to where the only thing I came into the world was with sin and my ugly little spirit. I didn't have anything to offer unless I drank the Kool-Aid, which was Jesus was the nicest person that ever lived, and if you don't have anything nice to say, you don't say anything at all. Now, this is a little bit graphic, but I'm just trying to just package it for you. So it took me a long time to comb through all of this stuff and even get down to little Annie. Who is she? What did she really bring to the table? Well, I was so stoic and so defended for so long that when words came out like inner child and all of this stuff, I thought it was the biggest bunch of baloney in the world, and I refused any invitation to talk about it. Now I know it was because it was too painful. It would commit me to a journey to work on that, and I wanted it to be out for 50 years so it could be proven science. I didn't follow anything that wasn't proven science. Well, now it has. And I now know differently. I now really, really know that each one of us was created with that glorious, glorious innocence. And I now know that it's never too late. I've worked with people in their 80s who have been able to cross that bridge. I now know through science, and you do too, that our brains are plastic. We have neuroplasticity. That means that any effort that we exert with our work together produces electricity that can come in and rewire and reshape the circuitry in our brains. And we are no longer left to our own devices. There are ways we can do it. We can do this together. I did not know that there was a way to communicate with my brain other than two ways. Take all the medicine laid out, which were a combination of lots of over-the-counter drugs when we were little, or read Norman Vincent Peale. Does anybody not know who Norman Vincent Peale is? Okay, babies up here. You have lots of life ahead of you. Okay. There's nothing wrong with thinking positively, but there is something wrong with brainwashing or an imbalance or not being able to call something what it really is. And so this was an author that often was referred to that could sort of have the power to wish reality away and put such a sugar-coated spin on things that it could relieve a parent's responsibility of really looking at the reality, I think, with you or another person. And very, very, very successful. And he assumed sort of a godlike position in my mind that something was wrong with me if I couldn't see the meaning and the shining positive significance of it immediately. And so I would say, this is bad, this is wrong, this is horrible. And was referred to Norman Vincent Peale. Well, I read recently that the truth about Norman Vincent was that he suffered from a horrible anxiety disorder. And before he published a book, he just about would have a nervous breakdown. That's the only thing. Here I am at 67, finally finding out the truth about Norman Vincent Peale. And I thought, boy, this really kind of follows the theme. You know, what's held up to the light is kind of finally exposed. He had to believe what he wrote. He had to believe those things he wrote. But he really didn't. But it was how he survived. It was how he coped with the world like the rest of us. So we all have things we've had to tell ourselves over the years in order to survive. I was out in the yard working a couple of days ago, laughing about this analogy. We live in a forest area, and as I lived up there single for years with this big property, I had a man that came to help me keep it, and it was a good thing he did, because every time I got a little bit of money, I would hollow out a piece of forest and landscape it, and it just really, really, really developed. And so he would come on Saturdays and try to hack away a little bit of the forest, and we would landscape that until gradually it really became a nice looking place. And he would say, "This poison ivy, I know allergic. You allergic, you need me, poison ivy." Well, of course I looked at it, it looked like poison ivy, and I thought it was poison ivy all over the place. And I had poison ivy when I was like 4 and 5 from our forest where we grew up. And I had gotten it in my face and all over my eyes. And I was pretty terrified of poison ivy. So I was only too happy to pay him top dollar to get in there and eradicate this poison ivy. And I always admired when he would reach in there, and just pull out a strand, and he goes, we Mexicans, we know allergic to poison ivy. Totally believed it. So I was out there the other day thinking about this. One of my sisters was by there a couple of years ago, and I told her this story, and she said, "Ann, that's not poison ivy." I said, "Of course it is. It absolutely is. I swear it's poison ivy." So when these little plant identifiers came on our phone as apps, she takes the picture and she goes, "Well, look, we go to Virginia. Her husband's from Virginia. I know my Virginia creeper." So I'm out there day before yesterday, hand pulling loads of Virginia creeper. Always grateful for my gardener, but I think about all of the lies that have wound themselves through my nervous system, like they were always Virginia creeper. How did they poison my system? I absolutely knew. They conditioned my every thought, my every approach, the decisions that I made. What else is down there in the subconscious? It is so easy for me to get to, like pulling up all these vines was such a relief that I could toss them away, and how free I felt with just throwing them over the hill and they're gone. How many times ahead can happen for me with this material and getting to enjoy it with you all? It's no much fun. No fun by myself. What if we had the perspective that we could actually have it in community? Because that is where the joy comes in. We have such an advantage here at Woodmont. I just really want to thank Woodmont, and I want to thank Clay Stauffer for supporting and promoting this incredible and rigorous training I've received to offer this program to you, and you'll be hearing more about it. But we are now licensed as part of a global healing community called REACT or LIFT, and you'll be getting more information about that. And you all are at the charter meeting, which will be fun to look back on. Our mission is to strengthen our own wellness, our self-care, and then rippling out from here, waves of community healing and wellness. And I think that Jim and I did a talk with Clay. What was that, like last spring a year ago, something like that, and people really received that well, and wish we'd do more in the community. And then, of course, Covenant. and then we've done a lot of trauma work. I brought some colleagues in from the Federal Office of Crime Advocacy, people who had worked with each school shooting across the country that came as a team of experts and some other things. But I just really have felt like that we needed to have a weekly thing on the little traumas of our lives that perhaps have led up or are still going on, that along with what continues to happen in the world, make us really anxious and hypervigilant. You know, we really have to keep pace with those things. And maybe also you've had big traumas, so it's little t and big T and what those are. So I want to introduce the concept of complex trauma, not to put something on you that you think doesn't belong there, but just to acknowledge the reality of every day when we listen to the news, every day when we go out on the interstate, every day when we hear what we hear, we are absorbing a lot of cultural and collective trauma. And sure, I need to talk louder. I'm so sorry. I'm going to be getting a mic. Thank you for letting me know. So when we hear the word recover, a lot of us in our mind think, oh gosh, I'm not going to end up like Ann, over there in South Hall. I just painted a pretty good picture for you. Or we think of, oh my gosh, needle in the arm, drug addict in the alley. We go to an extreme picture, when in fact that's not true at all. I mean, to recover actually means to get back, to regain, to find an identity, to find and identify again, to regain a healthy position. So that little child that I talked about, going back and finding him or her again, often people will bring a photograph of themselves at 2 years old, before all this stuff started to happen, and say, I want to find this kid. I want to find this kid who kind of naturally knew what to do, who knew the right stuff to do, then got faced with all these adults who weren't there. So we have anger, depression, anxiety, negative and critical thinking, maybe lack of self-forgiveness. These could be things that just kind of continually go on within us that don't manifest on the outside, that only we know about. But you don't have to live that way. So we all have developed unhealthy coping mechanisms that may not be working. And again, many of us, particularly in that very nice South, although it's not limited to our territory here, we were never trained to be mindful and aware of what was going on inside us. Like me, when I got to treatment at 42, group sat around, and what's going on inside you, huh? Well, can you tell us what brought you here? No. I could tell anybody what was going on inside them. My radar was finely honed. It took me forever to find out what was going on inside me. Just trying to survive and meet the needs and expectations of others. And sometimes when we do that, we pick up things along the way, like perfectionism, intense people-pleasing, lots of things that we'll hear that we think are all the good things, that we think are the things that we're supposed to be doing. And they really obscure who we really are. And they feel like a prison. I think of the scripture verse, and I can't quote it exactly, but it's Luke 4, verse 18, and I'll read it from the Message. I think next time, I don't have it right here, but Jesus came to set the captives free, to give the blind sight, and so forth, and many other spiritual leaders who have had this value of setting people free, Nelson Mandela, more recently, Mother Teresa, in terms of the people of India. You can think of many, many spiritual leaders who have done this, where finding freedom in goodness and breaking the reign of tyranny has been the very thing that has made their life work so significant. So what if we could break the reign of tyranny on our own mental prison? And what if we knew we were all doing it together? And what if we knew there was no money involved? And what if we knew there was no conversion or whatever it is, no bad church experience involved? What if we removed all of those constraints? And what if you knew there was a place you could come or listen to week after week? That's my only thing. What would happen? I think great things would happen. I think wonderful things would happen for all of us. And what if we knew people that might not have what I just described? How could we help them? Well, you come for a while, you'd pretty much be a trained advisor. You'd have handouts. You'd have videos. You'd have a website. You would be pretty darn well informed, wouldn't you? Right? So it's kind of a win-win proposition there. I like to think about starting on a couple of different topics, and there will be a lot of them. But first off, just to continue the theme about educating us about trauma, big events such as, I know in our family there were big events such as addiction, our house burned down, job loss, we just felt like we just couldn't catch a breath, horrible accidents leading to death, that. So in our family, we would not have any trouble identifying big trauma, early. And some of you all would not at all either. We could easily share about that. But then there's the thing called little t, little trauma, which is the ongoing process of things that make us feel unsafe. Even from the time that we don't have recorded memory, and we know now through science this is even prenatal. What was going on when our mothers were carrying us? What is the environment that we were born into that conditions our systems and our brains? So that's all really, really important. I'm going to give you a definition of complex trauma, and I have a handout for you with all of this before you leave. So I'll kind of wait so you won't just be reading. You can kind of concentrate on listening. Don't feel pressure to get all this down on paper. Complex trauma is an event a person perceives as being both dangerous and beyond their ability to handle. So you can see right off the bat that for a child, a little child, you got these big adults, or maybe nobody there, that they instinctively know, I have absolutely no power to get away from this, to stop this, or how they would feel unloved if there was nobody to protect them there. So basically, we've got a fear that we'll be hurt, we could die, or we might go crazy. If maybe not now thinking about it, but if you trace that back, that probably was a very real reality. But we may have gotten so defensive that we never allowed ourselves to think that. So there's two types of trauma. There's simple, which is that one-time horrific event, and I mentioned some examples. And then there's complex, which are repeated instances, exposure to multiple forms of danger where we don't feel safe. We must always be on guard and are unable to fully relax. And when that happens, we may make an inner vow. I remember making this many times to myself. I can only trust myself. I can't trust anybody else. I can only trust myself. You know, it's a little bit different than like if you're a work environment and you're really disgruntled with your staff and, you know, you kind of have a little fit, you know, about finding all the papers at the copier, you know, in a disarray, and you put them together nicely and line up the staples and go, oh, nobody but me can do this like this, you know, kind of a little OCD fit, you know. It's different than that. It could be when you've really been betrayed, when you feel like that you've been totally misunderstood, when you've been reprimanded for speaking the truth, you know, anything like this. And trauma happens for two reasons. One, it's partly due to the event itself, and partly due to our perception of the event. So I'll give you an example here. One sibling takes dad's yelling as part of his character and just gives it right on back to him. Whereas another sibling who is more sensitive takes the yelling as a sign of danger. I have heard of a person who had a big brother who was about 8 years older, and the dad was just really subject to rage fits and yelling. And when he would do that, the older brother would just say, "Who do you think you are to boss us around like that?" And the dad would calm down. The younger brother would cower in the closet, and he would lay this down like a trauma track in his mind where he would remember every word, would feel like he was in danger, and then from that point on, anytime he heard a male voice at that pitch, it would just trigger and set it right off. Two boys, same families, entirely different reactions, and that's how it is. Another example, one sibling takes teasing and sarcastic remarks in stride, and the more sensitive sibling takes them literally as cut downs and put downs and develops a very low sense of self-esteem. So here again, siblings are going to react very differently. One of my early trainers, Patrick Carnes, used to talk about four sisters. He was the one boy, and he would talk about something that would happen. They would take a boat out on Lake Michigan or something like that, and I think it was something like the motor caught on fire out there, and it was a really traumatic event. And then he would play each one of his four sisters, role play, completely different perspectives on what happened. You wouldn't even know it was the same event. And we would all be out there just going, yeah, we all saw it different, you know, maybe subtly or maybe dramatically. So there's different degrees of trauma. This healing effort is not about blaming. And you'll be so glad to know that. It's not about blaming ourselves. It's not about blaming a parent or a caregiver or a best friend or whoever might have been involved. You know, it's not about worrying about being bad or disrespectful or disloyal to that figure at all. It's to create awareness and understanding of how we got to where we are today. You know, famous saying is you have to know where you've been in order to know where you're going. And many people will cut me off before I get halfway through that sentence by saying, it's too late, it's too painful, I'm not worth it, I can't change now. I mean, I hear them all. So when you hear those excuses, that is a well-formed defensive wall, which means the person really needs attention and needs to pay attention to that. There's a lot of authenticity behind that. Another one is, I had the perfect family with just that amount of pushback. And that's usually the dead giveaway, is no one has a perfect family that they're really feeling like if I dare whisper anything about my family, I will be as though I've defected to the Russian gymnast team or something. I've done something horrible. I've committed espionage, because it's just, our secrets are so tightly kept. So if you feel thoughts like that coming up in your mind, you begin to slowly relax and realize you're not there anymore. You're not the kid held hostage. You're not in that marriage. It was not good for you. About 8 or 9 years ago, Clay asked me to tell my story, or use the topic of the wounded healer. Henry Nouwen, you may be familiar with his book, which is quite famous, and sort of the image of we can heal and help best when we've been through things ourselves and healed and overcome from that. And I worked on it for a while, and all of a sudden, I think it was the Friday before the Sunday I was going to do it, the thought came to me, they're all dead. Which means that I could really tell my story. They're all dead. It's supposed to be funny. It basically means that if I told it in a wise and good way, that I was not going to hurt or damage anybody on this earth if I just tell them the truth in order to help other people. All the things that had impeded me before were gone. It's on YouTube, The Wounded Healer. You would not believe the feedback, even to this day, that I get just simply from opening up about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And you have to be wise. You can't do that to everybody. But just taking the risk of being able to do that was a big growth step for me. I want to talk about the causes of complex trauma, and then we'll wrap this up. You may, in your head, refuse these and say, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, and go to an extreme definition of some of these words. But I think as we get more into this, you'll realize that the definition is a lot more broad than you think. These are the four most common causes: abuse, physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, spiritual, which I mentioned before. And this can include being bullied at school, or being bullied by a person who's more powerful or dictatorial. Often we find that can be a person that is uses abuse of authority. This could be the year of the horrible teacher, the year of them looking for an excuse to send you to the principal to be spanked, the singled out child. This can be something like that. Number 2 is neglect, physically and or emotionally unavailable. Parents who are workaholics, a parent caretaker who's dealing with mental illness, chronic illness. Just being in a family where any of your caregivers just simply didn't have the tools to be doing the job of raising or meet the needs of children. Number 3 is abandonment. And this can fall under the early death of a parent, a divorce in the family, say a parent who has chronic fatigue syndrome and simply can't care, for the child, a Adoption is a huge one to look at, not knowing the birth family, just having this sort of emptiness there, losses. And then fourthly, unmet needs. When there's failure or inconsistency on meeting basic human needs. So I will be giving you all this handout. The other parts will include fight, flight, freeze, which is definitions of the reactions. You've heard all of these. What we tend to do when we feel like we're threatened and how that works in the brain. And also, I have some questions for you, focus questions, that you might want to think about during the week about your own life. You can identify causes of these things. And also there is a sheet on the other topic that we'll be talking about, which are based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But we have 12 needs. We're the only mammal species that need a parent or caregiver to survive, because we need them there. We need them emotionally present in order to provide 12 things that we need to preserve that authenticity, that little pearl, innocent pearl of a child, so that authentic part doesn't just shrivel up and get coated over by mask. And these following needs need to be met consistently: safety, respect, acceptance, a sense of belonging, validation of our thoughts, feelings, and individuality, fairness and justice, honesty, which is trust, intimacy and attachment. It means we could talk about our feelings, our dreams, our hopes and aspirations. Nurture, belief in God or some sort of a higher power, consistent boundaries, and unconditional love. And that's a lot right there to unpack. And we've got the time and the space and the material to do it. I just kind of want to lay out a little track for between here and Christmas, that if we can look at these 12 needs, we can look at some areas of complex trauma that have either occurred in our life or in the life of someone that we love that's going through this right now. I think that we can make a lot of headway. So I'm going to conclude this part right now, and thank you so much for being here today, everyone.